Hi, everybody. I'm Gordon Weiner, Research Director at the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, MSI is a nonprofit that serves as the bridge between marketing theory and business practice. And our goal is to move the needle on significant marketing problems. We do this by funding research by leading academics worldwide on topics voted on by our 65-plus member corporate sponsors. And then we disseminate that research through members-only events and a variety of publications. I'm very pleased to welcome you to another MSI for Members by Members webinar. This is a series of webinars on subjects related to MSI's current research priority topics. First, I'd like to point out that the chat with presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen, this feature can be used to send through any questions you have for Peter or Kay, our presenters, during the presentation. We will gather those questions and use them in a brief Q&A session following the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speakers. They're going to be Peter Verhoef, Professor of Marketing and Chair of the Marketing Department at the University of Groningen, and Kay Lemon, Executive Director of MSI and Accenture Professor at Boston College Carroll School of Management. The title for the presentation is Understanding Customer Experience Throughout the Customer Journey. Let me just give you a little bit more background on Peter and Kay. Peter's publications have appeared in many major journals such as the Harvard Business Review, Journal of Marketing, Marketing Science, International Journal of Research and Marketing, and he's been awarded several Best Paper Awards for the Journal of Marketing and has served on the editorial boards of many of these journals. Kay Lemon, in addition to teaching at Boston College, as I mentioned, she's currently our Executive Director at MSI. She's a globally recognized expert in the areas of customer management, customer equity, and the dynamics of customer-firm relationships. She's done extensive speaking, training, and consulting in this area with leading companies, and her work has appeared in leading marketing journals, and she has received Best Paper Awards from those journals, such as the Journal of Marketing. She's actually authored 3 books, one of which I'll mention, Customer Equity, Marketing Strategy for Profitable Customer Relationships, with Roland Rust and Das Narayandas. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kay and Peter.
Thank you, Gordon. Peter and I are very excited to present this webinar today and to share with you some of the things that we have learned about customer experience. This work is we're presenting today part of the Journal of Marketing article, and we'll give you the access to that at the end of the talk. But we just want to give you some insights on what we've learned, kind of moving beyond some of the hype of customer experience and taking customer experience to the next level. So I'll be doing the first about half of the talk to talk about what we know, and then I'll turn it over to Peter, and he'll talk about some of the key insights that we've gained on a few specific topics. So let's start out by setting the scene. You know, so much has been talked about in customer experience. It's just been popping up all over. We have books about it. We have articles about it. And it keeps growing and growing. And in your own organizations, you probably may see that you actually have positions dedicated to customer experience, whether it be a chief customer experience officer or a customer experience manager in operations, and we've seen this exploding. But as Peter and I have begun looking at this issue of customer experience, we began to ask, is customer experience really new? Or is it just the latest buzzword for things we've been doing all along? You can think about on this slide, whether it be understanding a service operations linkages, or looking at customer service, or measuring customer satisfaction, or measuring net promoter score, or understanding loyalty, or understanding customer trust and commitment. These are things we've been looking at for a long time in marketing and really kind of saying, what is this new customer experience bit? So what Peter and I did, and as I've talked to companies, and if Peter has presented this at several companies, this historical perspective, and when you see the next 2 slides, they're really ugly, I'll warn you in advance, this historical perspective is really helpful to understand what we shouldn't throw away of what we've already been doing And so we can kind of see how this customer experience perspective has emerged in marketing. So on this slide, basically what we've done is we've looked at the marketing literature through the lens of customer experience to show how it's developed over the past 50 years. And if we step back to the early consumer buying behavior models in the 60s and the 70s, we see that we first looked at path to purchase models then. It had a broad focus. These were conceptual linkage models. It's where the original path to purchase came from with the awareness, interest, desire, action model. And it really gave us a sense of how the purchase process worked. We then moved into the 1970s, and we began to focus more on customer satisfaction. And we said, okay, it's not enough to just go up to customer purchase. We have to look at what happens after purchase. And the satisfaction and loyalty era identified these key metrics that we can use to figure out how customers are thinking and feeling post-purchase. That then jumps us up to the next generation that feeds into customer experience, and that's services marketing. Services marketing really began to look at the atmospherics, the environment. We got process models. It was really the early journey mapping, and we'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. It also began to connect marketing and operations, and this was really before IT was quite as important. And there was this whole focus on quality, and we see that again in the customer experience movement today. Moving on, and particularly in the business-to-business literature, we then moved into relationship marketing. And we began to look at many other attitudinal drivers, like commitment and trust, and whether people have high switching costs that lead them, and inertia that connects people to organizations. We keep going, and we get to 10, 15 years ago, and we saw the surge of customer relationship management and CRM. And why did this happen? Because all of a sudden we had a lot of data. So finally we begin to see that there's this notion of data-driven marketing. We actually have multi-channel aspects. We can identify key levers. We can begin to have attribution models, multi-touchpoint attribution models, and we can begin to do return on investment for marketing actions for the first time. We then move into the customer centricity and customer focus era, kind of same time with CRM, where we really see this strategic push to have the customer perspective throughout the entire organization. This is where the jobs to be done approach tends to pop in, and this is where even you begin to see things like Net Promoter Score kind of being pushed all the way down throughout the organization to make the entire organization customer-centric. Then most recently, in this decade, we really see a focus on customer and consumer engagement. And we think that that comes because of the explosion in social media and mobile. And so with these additional touch points, customers have all sorts of additional abilities and capabilities of ways to engage with the firm. So we go through this historical perspective just to have you say, don't forget everything you've ever learned about marketing and everything you've learned about metrics, because it all builds up into this customer experience focus. So let me move on to a definition of customer experience that we'll use throughout the rest of the talk. So customer experience is defined as being comprised of the cognitive, emotional, physical, sensorial, and social elements that mark the customer's direct or indirect interactions with another market actor. Now, a couple things about this definition. It is multidimensional. It's not just the cognitive, not just the emotional. It's also all the senses that go into the experience. It's social. You need to take into account context. It's direct and indirect interactions, not just with the company, but maybe the company's intermediary or some partners or channel partners, and we'll get into that in a minute. So if we take this and we look a little bit more in depth at it, this comes from some work by Bernd Schmidt, who's done a lot of work in the area of customer experience and who will be speaking at the upcoming MSI trustees meeting in April, looking at, you can think of key experiences as having sensorial aspects, feeling, actions, relationship, thinking. You kind of think of all these different elements as it relates to experience. And again, work from with Bernd Schmidt and his colleagues kind of looked at statements about brands. And I won't read all of these, but as you look at them, you can see that whether it be Nike or Apple or Starbucks or BMW, the statements that consumers make and shoppers make about these brands have all of those different components that relate to thinking, feeling, acting, relating, and the social elements. So as we take that definition of customer experience, we then need to move it, and this was Peter's and my focus, to kind of understand a process or journey view. Because a lot of the work that firms have been doing in the area of customer experience relates to understanding and mapping the customer journey. So what we did is we took what we know about customer experience and tried to put it into a relatively simple journey process that can be adapted to any company. So you can think about the customer experience as it happens at a current point in time. And the customer journey is kind of this happening through time. And so we can think of the customer experience first as a pre-purchase phase. And the pre-purchase phase will be everything leading up to the actual decision to buy. And the behaviors associated with that will be things like need recognition, consideration, and search. And all of these can happen in any channel. And you'll see in the orange we have the different types of touch points. And I'll get to those in a minute. But this is trying to kind of capture some of the multidimensionality of the customer journey. We then have a purchase stage, and the behaviors associated with the purchase stage will be choice, ordering, and payment. And again, we'll have different touch points that the firm will be able to have some control over in that stage as well. And then we have the post-purchase stage, which is, in a sense, all-encompassing post-purchase because it includes consumption and usage and post-purchase engagement and service requests, and all those kind of things in the post-purchase stage. But we have to recognize that this model is dynamic. And so past experiences, where you'll also go through the pre-purchase and post-stage, will influence this customer experience. And similarly, this customer experience will influence future experiences in a repurchase sense, where you'll also go through the pre-purchase and post-purchase stage. And those touch points are going to be in each of those. So I know that's a lot to go through, but we're going to keep moving on. And the key thing to think about is within this journey, it's important for companies to identify your moments of truth where you really make or break the relationship, your opportunities to elevate where you can delight the customer or really move things to the next level in the relationship, or the real dangers where you have to avoid screwing up. That if you mess that part up, the relationship is gone for good. The other thing you need to consider is context. So many of these journeys, or all these journeys, they don't happen in isolation. They're also influenced by the context around the customer. What's the customer feeling himself or herself? What's the social environment in which he or she finds themselves? What's the market environment? What's the competitive environment? Who are your partners? And then what's the environmental aspect itself? What's the weather doing today, right? All those things really come into play. So I mentioned early on that we had looked at specific types of touch points and how they might influence the customer journey. And as Peter and I have worked on this, this has become, we think, one of the most powerful insights that has come out of the work we've done together. And it's saying, everybody wants to know what opportunities do we have to influence the customer journey, but the truth is you have to think of touch points as to how much control you have over them and where you might be able to influence them. So the first type of touch point is brand owned. And this is what we always think of. This is the 4 Ps. This is the stuff that we control. This is our advertising. This is our packaging. This is the efficacy of our medication. This is the how convenient, where are our locations, what hours do we have, what price do we charge. These are managed by the firm and under the firm's control. And I think we know a lot about these and how they affect the customer journey. The second one, well, here's an example. Bloomingdale's Loyalist program. What they have is so many different ways that they touch the customer in the store, and they really control those touch points in the store. Partner-owned touch points are those that are jointly designed, managed, or controlled by the firm and one or more of its partners. So if you are going onto the Amazon website, Amazon is probably a partner for whatever products that you're buying from them, but also the conduit to Amazon, whether it be your iPhone or your Android phone or your laptop, is also a partner. And so you have to think of those partners as well. Your agencies also are critical partners, and all of your marketing suppliers are also critical partners as partner-owned touchpoints. The example I have here is Amazon. We can think about Amazon in terms of partner-owned touchpoints, whether it be the Amazon Dash button, so that you can just simply buy Tide by pushing a button, or whether it be Alexa. On the news today, they talked about how you can now order your Starbucks through Alexa. And so you think about how Starbucks is now using Amazon as a partner, or how Amazon Prime has really become a partner for a lot of companies. The third one would be customer-owned, and customer-owned would be the ones that the firm doesn't control. You know, when the customer's hungry, when the customer chooses to exercise, when the customer is depressed, when the customer is thoughtful. These are the things that the customer brings to the organization and to the experience. An example would be the customer problem of keeping track of stuff. This is maybe my own personal issue, but you know, you say, how do I know I've lost my keys or I've lost my phone? You know, one of my favorite apps is Tile. So Tile is a customer-owned solution to keeping track of stuff. You put these little tiles on your keychain, on your phone, and basically it has GPS and you can track it anywhere. Other companies trying to say, how can we bring that into a touch point that perhaps we can influence? Delta now lets you track your baggage in real time through its app, the same kind of thing. So it's the customer's problem, but the firm is finding a way to solve it. The fourth, social, external, and independent touch points. We know these as social media, but also all the different ways that the social environment and the environment around us can influence our touch points that influence the customer journey. A recent example I really enjoyed comes from JetBlue, where they recognized on a particular flight they had way too many babies. And so this is a great video where they showed that if 4 babies, they made the announcement that if 4 babies cried on the flight, everybody would get a free flight. So they took advantage of the external surroundings to really influence the customer's journey in a positive way, what could have been negative. So in conclusion of this part, I want you to understand that the journey can be understood in a relatively simple way, and there are specific opportunities to influence the customer journey. I'd like to now turn it over to Peter, who will talk about some specific insights that we gained from our work in customer experience.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you for giving such great insights. Let me continue with the insights we found from existing literature on customer experience. And I want to start with how you can basically look at the customer experience and the customer journey and which techniques you can use for that. And when looking at the literature, we saw actually that there's one strong technique available already for some years in specifically the service marketing literature, which is called service blueprinting. And we conclude that this technique can be a solid starting point for customer journey mapping. However, if you look at that technique, it is essential that you take a customer-centric perspective. And it therefore requires customer-centric or customer input into the process. That's not always happening. Sometimes it happens within firms that actually managers or employees sit together and are thinking about how the journey goes, let's say from searching for products to finally purchasing and after sales. And then not all steps can be taken into account. Here's just one example of an express mail delivery firm. Especially Mary Jo Biegner did a lot of work from the Center of Service Leadership from Arizona State University, and actually this is part of the work that she's done more than 10 years ago. It shows basically how customers move through the service delivery process. Taking that perspective, you have to have a customer-centric customer journey. That also means that you should not only look at your own journey that you offer, but that you also should look at that journey from a broader perspective. In this regard, we already highlighted and emphasized the, let's say, touch points that you do not own or that you're, for instance, working with partners. And therefore, it's essentially that you have to look at the service delivery network. This service delivery network can make or break the customer's overall experience. Let me show just one example, which Kay and I found very intriguing and just showing how this service delivery network works. Let me show you and assume that you want an evening out. And of course you can say, well, the customer is basically only dealing with the theater company. However, in the service delivery network, there are many things relevant. You need to park the car. Maybe you need to buy tickets, and then ATM is crucial. When going out, you might also want to go to a restaurant, and if you have a young family, you maybe want to have some babysitting. Finally, also public transport might be relevant. So all these external partners have an impact on the customer journey. So essentially, you have to ask the question, how do other services or other service providers influence the core brand and service experience? Of course, this depends on the type of product or service you offer, but it's essential to understand the role of, let's say, service partners. So our conclusion is that when mapping and analyzing the customer journey, it's very critical to take this broader service delivery system into account. If you don't do that, you miss part of that delivery network and you might not be able to deliver a good customer experience to your customers. And also our conclusion from the literature is that you should aim to take greater control of this service delivery network. Because if you do that, as a firm, you might also have a greater control on the customer experience delivery. So a big question many firms face is, how do we measure customer experience? And how do we need to measure? So we started this presentation, this webinar, with saying that customer experience is a multidimensional construct. However, when you look at firms, they tend to focus on a limited set of metrics. Specifically, customer satisfaction have been around for years, but as noted already before, you see a strong attention within many, many companies for what we call the Net Promoter Score. And there's some other metrics coming up and recently advocated in the literature, for instance, is the Customer Effort Score, which is a metric that aims to measure how easy it is for customers to connect to the firm. Note again that these metrics do not have a multidimensional perspective usually, but has a strong focus on mainly the cognitive dimension and sometimes a bit on the emotional dimension, and then I specifically want to highlight the Net Promoter Score. In a recent article we wrote, we basically classified these metrics in using two dimensions. First, do these metrics use the full scale or focus on extremes? And for instance, the Customer Effort Score uses the full scale, so that means that you're interested in how do people score on that scale from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or 1 to 7. However, when you look at NPS, especially the official NPS, they use a transformation where they look at the difference in the promoters and detractors. In satisfaction research, you see sometimes marketing research companies as well as firms that they look at the top two box. Again, they then focus on the extremes and do not use the full scale. Also, you can look at if you look at these data, do they have a more past focus or a future focus? And specifically, the Net Promoter Scores tend to have a kind of more future focus by looking at, are customers willing to advocate your firm in the future? Whereas if you look at customer satisfaction, it has a more present focus, and the customer effort score, looking at a specific aspect of the service delivery, has a stronger past focus. If you look at the literature on these customer feedback metrics, because they're in the marketing literature, there has been a strong debate about which metrics are good and which are not good. We first conclude that there's no agreement on how to measure customer experience. As mentioned, most of the metrics used focus solely on one part of the customer experience construct. So there's a need for developing this customer experience measurement in the future. However, when we look at the current metrics being used, our conclusion from the literature is that both customer satisfaction and the Net Promoter Scores tend to perform equally well in predicting firm performance and customer behavior. Although you have to be careful that specific context, specific metrics might work better. And the third conclusion we take is that especially it seems worthwhile, if you want to predict, have some predictive power, that you transform metrics. Because by doing so, you can account for potential nonlinear effects. Specifically, the fact that customers that you are able to delight, that are very happy with your firm, are more, for instance, more loyal. So those people tend to really lead to a higher performance. Fourth conclusion is actually that we find if you have customer feedback metrics focus on a very specific domain or have a strong past focus, these metrics are not strong in predicting future performance. Finally, it seems useful not to focus on a single metric, but to combine multiple metrics. So these are our most important insights if you look at customer experience measurement. Finally, you can also take a firm perspective on customer experience management. And that we focus on how are firms able to really focus on a strong customer experience and a strong customer experience delivery to their customers. There we conclude that it's important that firms should have a customer-centric focus. And that, you could say, already goes back a long way, where within marketing we have advocated strongly for, let's say, market orientation and customer orientation. Very important to note is that delivering customer experience is focusing on so many touch points using new technologies. It includes service operations and products. It includes human resources, etc. So you need to involve multiple functions in order to deliver a good customer experience. And finally, you need to require specific capabilities, and we already emphasized the role of the partner delivery, of the service delivery network with your partners, but also in today's world with increasing numbers of data where you can observe how customers flow through their customer journey, you need to have strong customer analytics to develop successful customer experience strategies. So that means basically that customer experience is not the sole responsibility of marketing. Customer experience lives everywhere. And that also means that you need to have a strategic approach towards customer experience, and coordination is very important in order to deliver a good customer experience to your customers and to the market. To highlight the importance of new technologies, we just want to take this example on the My Disney experience. You can go to websites of Disney and look up maybe some nice videos on YouTube where you can see how this magic band of Disney works. We also describe this case in our article. But it's very interesting to see how technology enables Disney to deliver a stronger customer experience to their customers, and that includes functions such as stronger convenience, higher service quality, but also probably more, let's say, emotional connections between the customer and Disney. We also see these kind of technologies in other markets. So these are our conclusions, which we have been working now for some years on this topic, and also working with companies. And I want to go back to what we discussed about customer experience measurement. And what we find is that companies face some pressing issues if they set up a customer experience measurement system. So that first, of course, involves how do you measure it, and we discussed some insights there. But we also see some pressing issues surrounding customer experience measurement and the measurement system. First, should you use an overall measure for customer experience? So should you really have one measurement, but also use that for the total firm? First, of course, the pros are that you have ease in measurement. It's not much response burden for your customers, and you can report a single metric. It also leads to a short questionnaire. Yes. The cons are, though, that you have customer experience is a multidimensional construct. It might not give you sufficient detail and insights, and it might end up in your firm of just a reporting score. So that is something to think about when you set up a customer experience measurement system. The second issue that firms face, can we still use surveys, or should we use other measures or methods to collect our data? And the pros are, for instance, that using surveys you could have relative more control. They're very well-developed measurement techniques, very well-developed skills. However, what we see is that there's a constant use of firms using these surveys. Every touch point is being measured. So what about respondent fatigue? Are people still able to answer all these questions? We see low response rate, and also some things that you can measure everything, but do respondents really observe that something is done with their information? Furthermore, you will see potential new techniques, specifically in the area of social media and big data. You could probably use those kind of metrics. And that leads to a third issue. You might have alternative social metrics of customer experience. Again, this means that you have to use no survey. That can be lower cost. You can use available data. And probably, specifically if you do, for instance, text analysis, you can look at emotional responsive. However, you have to be concerned about, is your sample still representative? Or can you only get positive or very negative information? Is there a negativity bias? You do not really have control. And what are you actually measuring? Is it really customer experience, or are you measuring just an image? And you can make limited customer crossings because you do have less information about customers filling in your survey. Finally, one pressing issue is, should customer experience be measured for every touch point in a continuous way? What we observe for many companies, such as airline companies and other service companies, banks, is that every touch point is almost measured with, for instance, NPS questions. It could lead to questions you've just had a meal on a plane and say, what is your NPS about maybe the airline company, or even on that per touch point level, would you recommend this meal to another customer? Of course, the pros are that you have detailed information for every touch point on a continuous way. You can monitor it and maybe manage it. However, this kind of systems leads to a strong burden for customer experience measurement. It leads to many, many data points, and the question is, are all these data being used? You could either, of course, use more surveys or more longer surveys, but still it's a burden for customers. And the third issue is, again, is information actually used. So to round up and to this presentation, we end with some conclusions. We have 7 conclusions. We think customer experience is very important. It's not novel, but it is a relevant construct that deserves attention within academia and in business. Second, and probably the most important lesson of today, customer experience is a multidimensional construct, but be aware of the fact that many firms have a lack of attention for the multidimensional nature of this construct and have a strong focus solely on the cognitive part on this construct. Thirdly, the process view is very important. In order to understand the customer experience, you should, as firms should acknowledge that customer experience and delivery strong customer experience, you need to understand the customer journey from search to purchase to pre-purchase, after purchase. And therefore you need to map how this customer experience is delivered via different touch points. And we acknowledge 4 different touch points types. Importantly, customer experience is delivered in a network environment. So you should go beyond your own delivery, your own relationship with customers, but also how other partners are helping you in delivering a good customer experience. The measurements of customer experience are often very limited and focus on rather generic opinions. Finally, organizations need to pay full attention to customer experience, and therefore they also require a certain culture and skills. By mentioning these 7 conclusions, I want to end this presentation, and I guess there's now room for questions.
Great. Thank you, Peter. As a reminder, we've gotten a lot of really good questions. Please send any more questions you have directly through the chat with presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. And you can see on that last page how you can communicate directly with Peter and or Kay if you have other questions, aside from the ones that we're going to get to in a second after the session is over. So yeah, the questions have been interesting, and I'll get to them. You know, they cover everything from measurement issues to more conceptual issues of how to align this with other approaches, the investment issue of putting dollars into improved customer experience, and actually how to practically activate against customer experience. What do you do? So let me pose some of these that we picked up from the audience. First of all, on the measurement question, several ways you talked about multiple metrics, but you know, people have experience, bad choice of words, they use customer satisfaction as a measure, and they use NPS. But can you say something about the pluses and minuses, or when one might be preferred to another, perhaps in different business contexts?
Peter, I think this would be a great one for you to lead off on, particularly with your research on looking at the top 2-box score versus in the different industries. This
is a very interesting question. Let me, in general, and it's difficult to get into strong conclusions here, but my experience here is that customer satisfaction is a very good metric in, let's say, more cognitive or, let's say, functional environments. Whereas Net Promoter Score is a stronger metric in, let's say, more, let's say, hedonic or emotional environments. As Net Promoter Score have, to some extent, a stronger, let's say, emotional part. There's though much work to be done on this. I can only also refer you to a paper which we wrote 2 years ago with Eva de Haan and Torsten Wiersel, published in the International Journal of Research and Marketing, where we show some difference in industries, but it's very difficult to come up with some, let's say, general findings on this.
Yeah, the other thing I would just add on that, and Peter mentioned it, and I would echo it again. Customer satisfaction tends to be very present and a little bit of a past focus. It's when you want to understand how the status of your current relationship with the customer, whereas NPS tends to be more future focused, and the evidence tends to bear that out, that it's a little bit more future focused. All the research that we've looked at is that there are benefits organizationally to focusing on a single metric and some consistency around that single metric. so whether that's CSAT or NPS. But there are also benefits to having multiple metrics because they tend to tap into these slightly different aspects of the customer journey, if you will. Gordon, you had another question?
Yeah, another one came in on the activation side, and in particular, one of our attendees asked about if you're in the fast-moving consumer goods category, packaged goods category, selling through retail. There's a lot of retail touch points, but they essentially are under the control of the retailer. So the question is, if you're a brand, you're, say, a national brand selling through retailers that you don't directly control, but they're your customers, how do you activate? How do you increase or improve the customer experience knowing that you have those limitations in that environment to work with?
That's a great question. I'll take a start on that, and Peter, then see what you'd like to add. I think that what our framework suggests is not so much, we don't have the answer of this is the exact way that you activate that. But what our framework would suggest is that you have to take a look at the customer journey, not just the experience in the store, to understand the process that the customer goes through from identifying a need that they're out of a certain frequently purchased consumer good, and all the way through the consumption of that to the repurchase. And by understanding that entire journey, you can then say, okay, what do we own? What do we not own? What do our partners own? Clearly, in this case, the partner, the shopping partner, owns the in-store experience. But I think that you take a look at what's going on with the Internet of Things, and whether it be Google Home or Alexa or any kind of a DTC setup, how do you get your customer to say to Alexa, Alexa, order Pampers versus Alexa, order diapers? I mean, you have to kind of understand all through the purchase journey how you try to begin to own and make your brand more salient. And so I think there are opportunities for kind of strengthening the brand, strengthening the way people talk about the brand, because we've got to think about how that journey is going to change. Within the retailer itself, my sense would be that you'd use the traditional tools that you're using now, whether it be the category captain or being on site at Walmart, to really understand, because I think the other thing you can say is you can look at this customer journey framework with the retailer as the customer to see how can you better serve the retailer's needs as well.
Great.
I have nothing to add, Kate. Excellent.
Number of questions come in on the effectiveness and the investment side. For example, investments in customer experience can be compared to investments in traditional marketing mix elements, advertising, distribution, product, and so forth. How do you think about that issue, and how do you make those kind of comparisons? Should I invest or allocate resources more on the customer experience side or more on the traditional marketing mix?
Yeah, maybe if you look at our framework, actually, you see that part, let's say, of your marketing mix also, let's say, influences your customer experience. So it's not fully shown in our framework, but it's basically that if you have all these touch points, which partially, for instance, involves brand-owned touch points, right, that have an effect on your customer experience. So that suggests basically that you should go to more, let's say, extensive measurement, which means that you do investments in specific touch points that have an effect on a kind of intermediate measure that we call customer experience, but you could also take a kind of broader perspective. Looking at the work, for instance, of Mike Hansen's look at mindset metrics, and then see how that influences bottom line results. Beyond that, of course, there's much research that actually shows that the links between, although limited customer experience metrics, between customer satisfaction and firm performance. So maybe Kay can also add on this.
Yeah, I would take that. I would agree with exactly what Peter said, and I think we also got a question that looked at how do you link customer experience with customer lifetime value, and Peter and I have done a lot of work on customer lifetime value. And I think it's not shown in our presentation because our focus is really on understanding the journey itself and where you can intervene to make a difference, either with something you own or kind of things that you can semi-influence, and also what you might want to measure. But if we take this downstream, we've kind of ended this with kind of customer satisfaction or net promoter score. But if you take this downstream, you see how those mindset metrics or these kind of customer experience metrics will influence the likelihood that the customer comes back, buys more. So you've got intention measures, you've got repurchase measures, you've got customer retention, and you've got customer lifetime value. And I would think it's fair to say that we're both big believers in customer lifetime value as a metric that encompasses all these things so you can begin to understand it. And then working backwards, what that means is that this becomes, quite frankly, a really messy, dynamic, multi-touch attribution model, where you're looking at how all of these different pieces come together to influence parts of the journey. They have reinforcing effects, and eventually they influence customer lifetime value. And some of those will be marketing mix variables.
You know, from several of the questions, I think what it sounds like to me is people have experience with different frameworks for this, and one is the jobs to be done framework, which we've heard about from a couple of people. There's another called empowerment of the customer, which we've heard about from another. Do you try, or have you tried more to synthesize these different frameworks or different approaches and say, is there some overarching way to link them together, or do they need to be linked together? How do you think about that issue of the different frameworks and people are somewhat more experienced with one or the other?
This is a hard one. I'll take a stab at it, Peter, and maybe you'll have a better answer. On the jobs to be done one, and MSI had a webinar looking at some new approaches to jobs to be done just last week. I think that the jobs to be done comes in really in the pre-purchase phase of the customer journey, identifying what the customer is trying to do. And I've been looking at this in my research. I think it really relates back to a lot of the work that's been done in consumer behavior and the goals literature. So kind of understanding, and this is some of the work that I'm doing right now with Arne de Keyser and Tim Cunningham and Phil Klaus, where we're kind of understanding how the goal that the customer brings to the situation then influences his or her journey, and then should influence the way the experience is actually constructed. So I think the jobs to be done framework fits in very much. It fits in our decades approach in that whole customer centricity element. And then I really think it fits in kind of understanding the goal that the customer brings to a situation. I'm a real fan. Google has been looking at micro moments. And so if you Google micro moments, you'll find some really cool guides where they're looking at this. I want to know, I want to do, I want to go, I want to buy, which I think gets at this jobs to be done. The customer empowerment piece, I think, is really looking at this notion that brands have much less control than they used to have, and I absolutely agree with that. I think that question came from my colleague at Boston College, Jerry Smith. And thank you for that, Jerry. I think it's a great question. I think that's where we're trying to get at when we talk about the customer-owned touch points, recognizing that the brand does not own the touch points like they used to. It's really the customer owns these touch points, and I think that there's a lot more work that we could do to strengthen this. But if I were to put it in the framework, I would say that it is the sense that the customer actually begins to own some of the touch points that the brand used to own. I kind of went on that, Peter. You want to add anything?
No, I think I totally agree here. You could also argue that this customer empowerment is also shown in, let's say, some of these independent touch points. It also strongly builds up one of the literatures we started with was customer engagement, which is also heavily emphasizing that firms have problems in controlling, let's say, the customer. So in that sense, it gets back there in as well. With regard to the jobs to be done, I think one of the if you look already the satisfaction literature and also service quality literature, they already know that at some point customers have some, let's say, expectations up front. You could argue that these expectations up front are based on, let's say, the goals that consumers have. So part of that literature, I guess, is also heavily influenced by what we already know.
There's time for any more?
I think we have time for one more question about there's a lot of innovation in the customer relationship world about co-creation, customer creating the experience along with the provider. And the question is really, is that sort of moving us into new customer experience metrics, perhaps around things like access and responsiveness? Is that causing us to look outside of the traditional metrics like CSAT or NPS? And perhaps examples would be, some of these new innovative companies like Uber, where maybe there are new issues, new kinds of experiences because of co-creation, the customer taking more of an initiative there. So is that something you're seeing influence this field in terms of like new metrics in particular with the question?
I think new metrics are going to come, and I think that Peter and I have been thinking about that. And you got to figure out how you can unobtrusively kind of capture some of these metrics that you need. But I would say this is another great example of don't forget what we learned 20 years ago. Access and responsiveness are two of the cornerstones of the serve-qual approach that we learned 20, 30 years ago. What's different about the Uber and Car2Go examples is that you've got to understand access and responsiveness from both the consumer perspective and the service delivery person perspective. And so the fact that they get to co-rate each other, I think, is changing some of these metrics. But I think we have pretty good measurements around access and responsiveness that we could go back and use. I think that they've gotten lost as we've kind of bought into this overall CSAT or NPS is what we need because it leads us to just be the one metric we need to focus on. But for critical levers and drivers, I absolutely think that some of these other metrics are the way to go. Peter, final thoughts?
No, it's true. I think you should carefully look at what we already know. That's actually what we try to argue in this article as well. But if you look at co-creation, I think co-creation might lead to, let's say, some of the things that we emphasize in our customer experience definition. It might lead to more, let's say, emotional connections. It might also lead to more, let's say, cognitive, or not more, let's say, if you look at the work of Bernd Schmidt, is that people feel challenged to work with companies and to think about new solutions. In the end, of course, it also just, let's take the example of Uber. Part of that is just you need to go from A to B. So, and then the delivery mode or how that is serviced to customers is different. Maybe the business model is different, but in the end, it could be, let's say, the same experience that you would have, let's say, with other transport systems. But that's a very specific case probably.
Great. All right, well, thanks very much, Peter and Kay, for a great presentation and a lot of very good questions and responses. Thank you all for attending. If our speakers didn't get to all your questions or additional things you'd like to discuss, please reach out to them at the email addresses that are given there on your screen. That concludes this webinar. Our next webinar will be held Tuesday, February 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and will feature Spencer Harrison from Boston College. So again, many thanks to the members of the MSI audience for participating in this member-to-member webinar series, and look forward to your participation in the future. Thank you.